Today on Your Government in Action, where we cover bills, votes, records, and how it affects you. For 9 years, the federal government required most Americans to carry health insurance or pay a fine. Here is why that rule existed, who killed it, and what happened to your premiums when it was gone. Imagine a rule that said, buy health insurance or write a check to the IRS. That was the individual mandate, part of the Affordable Care Act signed into law in 2010. For 9 years, it shaped how millions of Americans made decisions about their health coverage. Then Congress quietly killed it, and the effects are still playing out today. Let's start with what the law actually required. The Affordable Care Act was signed by President Obama on March 23, 2010. It was a sweeping overhaul of the American health insurance system. But buried inside it was one provision that became the most controversial piece of the entire law: the individual mandate. Starting in 2014, most Americans were required to carry health insurance, not Medicaid, not Medicare, any qualifying health plan. If you did not have coverage, you owed a penalty when you filed your taxes. The penalty was set at $695 per year, or 2.5% of your household income, whichever number was higher, and it was capped at the cost of a bronze-level health plan. So if you earned more money, you paid more. Now, not everyone had to pay. The law carved out exemptions. If your income was too low to file a tax return, you were off the hook. If you faced a financial hardship, you could apply for an exemption. If you had a religious objection to insurance, you were exempt. And if you had a short gap in coverage, less than 3 months, there was no penalty. But for most working Americans who simply chose not to buy insurance, the fine applied. The logic behind this rule was straightforward, even if the politics were explosive. Health insurance only works when healthy people are in the pool alongside sick people. Healthy people pay premiums but rarely use services. That money helps cover the costs of people who need expensive care. If only sick people sign up, premiums skyrocket. Economists call this adverse selection. Think of it like a neighborhood pool. If only people with dirty kids use it, everyone else stops paying dues, and soon the pool gets too expensive to maintain. The mandate was designed to keep everyone in the pool. Now let's look at how this law actually made it through Congress. The Affordable Care Act did not pass quietly. It was one of the most contested pieces of legislation in modern American history. Democrats had been trying to pass universal or near-universal health coverage for decades. President Clinton tried in 1993. It collapsed. President Obama made it a central promise of his 2008 campaign. When Democrats won large majorities in both chambers in November 28, the window finally opened. The Senate began drafting its version of the bill in early 29. Negotiations stretched across the entire year. A key sticking point was the public option, a government-run insurance plan that would compete with private insurers. The Senate ultimately dropped it to keep moderate Democrats on board. On December 24, 29, Christmas Eve, the Senate passed its version of the bill. The vote was 60 to 39. Every single Democrat and 2 independents voted yes. Every single Republican voted no. The House then had to pass the Senate version, with only minor changes, because Democrats had lost their 60-vote supermajority in the Senate after a special election in January 2010. That meant they could not send the bill back to the Senate for a full vote again. The pressure on House Democrats was enormous. Some were from swing districts. Some had specific objections to abortion funding language. Speaker Nancy Pelosi spent weeks persuading members one by one. On March 21, 2010, the House voted 219 to 212 in favor. Not a single Republican voted yes. 34 Democrats voted no. President Obama signed the bill 2 days later. Almost immediately, Republican-led states filed lawsuits. The central argument was that Congress had no constitutional authority to force Americans to buy a private product. That argument went all the way to the Supreme Court. In June 2012, in National Federation of Independent Business v. Sebelius, the court upheld the mandate. The key vote was 5-4. Chief Justice John Roberts, a George W. Bush appointee, joined the 4 liberal justices. Roberts wrote that the mandate was not valid under the Commerce Clause, which had been the administration's main argument, but he said it was valid as a tax. Congress has the power to tax, and the penalty functioned like a tax. That ruling saved the law, but it also handed critics a new line. The ACA was a tax on the uninsured. That brings us to how the mandate was ultimately dismantled, and the votes that made it happen. Republicans campaigned against the Affordable Care Act for 7 straight years. Repeal and replace was a rallying cry from the moment the law passed. When Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016 and Republicans held both chambers of Congress, the moment finally seemed to arrive, but full repeal failed. In July 2017, the Senate voted on a skinny repeal bill. It would have eliminated the individual mandate and a few other provisions, but left most of the ACA intact. It failed 51-49. The deciding vote was Senator John McCain of Arizona, a Republican, who gave a dramatic thumbs down on the Senate floor. That failure was a major blow, but Republicans found another path. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a sweeping tax overhaul bill. It was the signature legislative achievement of the Trump administration. And tucked inside it was a provision that set the individual mandate penalty to $0, starting January 1, 2019. The bill did not repeal the mandate language. The requirement to have insurance technically remained in the law, but with a $0 penalty it had no teeth. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed the House on December 19, 2017. The vote was 227-203. 12 Republicans voted no, 0 Democrats voted yes. The Senate passed it on December 20, 2017. The vote was 51-49. 0 Democrats voted yes. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee was the only Republican to vote no. President Trump signed it into law on December 22, 2017. The mandate penalty was effectively dead. Within weeks, the legal battles resumed. In December 2018, a federal district court judge in Texas ruled that without the penalty, the entire Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional. That case, Texas versus United States, sent shockwaves through the health policy world. But in June 2021, the Supreme Court reversed that ruling 7-2. The ACA remained the law of the land. The mandate just had no enforcement mechanism. So once the penalty disappeared in 2019, what actually happened? The Congressional Budget Office had warned that eliminating the mandate penalty would have real consequences. Their projection: 11 million fewer Americans would be insured by 2021 compared to what would have happened if the mandate had stayed. That is a substantial number. And here is the underlying reason. When healthy people are no longer nudged to buy insurance, some of them drop it. They figure they are young, they are healthy, they will take the risk. That is a rational financial decision for an individual. But it is bad for the insurance pool as a whole. Without healthy people subsidizing the risk, premiums climb. And they did climb. In the individual market, the one where people who do not get coverage through an employer shop for plans, premiums rose roughly 3-5% faster than projected after the mandate penalty disappeared in 2019. That does not sound dramatic. But for someone paying $1,200 a month for a family plan, 3% is $36 a month or $432 a year. Here is the thing that surprised many analysts, though. ACA marketplace enrollment did not collapse the way some had feared. In fact, it grew. By 2023, enrollment hit a record 16.3 million people. How? 2 things changed. The American Rescue Plan in 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 both expanded the subsidies available to people buying plans on the ACA marketplace. Those subsidies made coverage cheaper for millions of people, even as base premiums crept up. So the picture is complicated. The mandate's removal hurt the insurance pool in theory. Premiums rose faster than they would have otherwise, but enhanced subsidies cushioned that blow for people who qualify for financial help. Let's bring this home and talk about what all of this actually means for you. Here is how to think about it depending on where you stand. If you buy insurance through your employer, the mandate's removal probably did not change much for you directly. Employer-sponsored coverage was always exempt from the penalty math. Your premiums are shaped by your company's plan, not the individual market. But if you buy your own insurance on the ACA marketplace, or if you ever had to buy coverage on your own, you felt the ripple effects. Premiums in the individual market rose faster after 2019 than before. The mandate's removal is one reason. It is not the only reason, but it is a real one. If you currently qualify for ACA subsidies, meaning your income is below a certain threshold, the expanded subsidies from 2021 and 2022 have likely offset those increases. You may actually be paying less today than you did 5 years ago. If you earn too much to qualify for subsidies, but buy your own coverage anyway, you have probably seen your premiums climb more steeply. You are in what some call the subsidy cliff. Too much income for help, too little to absorb rising costs comfortably. If you chose to go uninsured in 2019 or later because the penalty was gone, you took on real financial risk. A single emergency room visit can cost thousands of dollars. A hospital stay for something serious can cost tens of thousands. The mandate was controversial because it forced people to buy a private product. That is a legitimate philosophical objection. But the reason it existed was also real. Insurance pools need healthy people to function. When they leave, everyone else pays more. The debate over the individual mandate was never just about health care. It was about the role of government, the boundaries of federal power, and how much the healthy should be required to share the risk with the sick. Those questions are still unsettled today. The individual mandate was one of the most debated policies of the last 2 decades. It was born out of an economic reality. Insurance only works when everyone is in the pool. It was killed by a political reality. Americans do not like being told what to buy. The fight over it reshaped Congress, filled the Supreme Court's docket, and changed how millions of people get health coverage. The questions it raised are not going away. Subscribe to Your Government in Action for more breakdowns like this.